I would like to ask ChatGPT to give me tips on how to optimize, let's say, my Python code. So let me show you. First, I'm going to say, please give me some tips on how to optimize my Python code. And what you see here is basically ChatGPT is recommending various ways to optimize the code. First, use built-in functions and libraries. And then you can also use list comprehension, for example. So instead of defining a for loop and maybe add, for example, an accumulator in there, instead what you could do is that you can just use list comprehension to do the exact same code in just one single line instead. And it's also showing you examples here, which is pretty powerful. And then you can also use, kind of avoid using global variables. You can use efficient data structures. You can use generators. You can also use the in operators. Again, it's pretty amazing, really powerful, very good tips, along with examples associated with them. Okay. What if I would like maybe to provide ChatGPT with a sample code and trying to optimize it? For example, this is again a very simple example. I'm going to say, can you optimize this Python code for me? And here I simply have a function that just sums up two numbers together. You press enter, get very well. The code you provided is already quite simple and optimized, but what you could do is that you can add maybe a few suggestions. First, you can use type hints. Basically, you can add type hints to the function definition, and that can help improve the performance and readability. So basically, kind of ChatGPT has been able to rewrite the code for you here in a way, and added that simply type hints in there. And also, to do another suggestion, which is using lambda function instead. So instead of we're defining the regular Python functions, and actually call that function here, we're using lambda function instead. And that's, again, we're going to generate an optimized or a more efficient code in one single line of code. And then here it's showing you use the plus operator directly. So instead of defining a function, just perform addition and then calling that function, you can just simply say result equals to x plus y and call it a day. Okay. What you could do as well is you can say, well, could you please maybe give me a better answer as an example? Let's see maybe if ChatGPT has any additional ideas. So we're going to tell you, well, apologies for the previous answers. Since the provided code is already quite simple, it can be optimized further. However, here are some general tips on optimizing code. And here again, it's telling you pretty much the same, I would say, answer again, but maybe add additional tips associated with it. For example, using unnecessary calculations as an example, and so on. Okay. So what I would like to do next is I would like to perform code optimization as well, but maybe to a little bit more advanced code. So if you recall, we covered this before when we trained our machine learning regression model. And let me copy the code first, and then I'm going to show you what do I mean by that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to first ask ChatGPT to simply explain what this code is going to do. I'm going to say, what did this code do? And here I copied basically a list of code. And if you recall, this is the exact same code that I covered before when we trained our machine learning regression model, and we intentionally removed the xtrain and xtest part. So if I just press enter, what you see here is simply an explanation of the code. So ChatGPT is going to explain it first, and then I'm going to ask it afterwards to simply go ahead and optimize it. So let's wait and see. So here we go. What you see here is basically the code performs the following tasks. First, we're going to import necessary libraries. So we're going to import Seaborn, Pandas, Matplotlib, NumPy, and XGBoost, which is pretty accurate. And then we're going to read the CSV file here using Pandas read CSV function. And then we're going to display the first 6 rows, last 6 rows, and then perform feature or display the feature columns next. And then the code checks the shape of the data, right? And then we check if we have any missing values in the data using the isNull function. You also display the heat map using Seaborn. We display histogram as well. Then we display the pan plot using Seaborn to visualize the relationship. Again, pretty incredible because this is exactly what the code actually performed. And then we plot scatter plot afterwards. And then we split the data into the predictor X and target variable Y. And then we reshape the target variable. And then we split the data into training and testing. And this actually was missing part from the actual code, but this is kind of the assumption. Base ChatGPT assumed that we need this step and added it here. And then we define an XGBoost regressive model, train the model, and then predict the target variable. And then finally calculate the various regression metrics and display the evaluation metrics as well. So this is just simple code explanation. So what I could do here is I can say, well, could you please maybe optimize it for me? Can you optimize that code? Let's see what we're going to get. Here it's going to tell you several suggestions to try to optimize the code. For example, it's going to tell you, well, you can use a display instead of print, for example, display function. Here it's going to tell you, well, you need to scale, for example, the data before splitting. Another recommendation is, well, you can also use grid search CV as an example to perform hyperparameters tuning and optimization, which is pretty incredible because, well, this is actually a correct statement because what we have done so far is we actually have been able to train our machine learning regression model, which is XGBoost regression, but we haven't optimized a model parameter, which is a key step that we need to do here. And this is, again, a very solid, good recommendation as well. Okay. And simply here, basically, ChatGPT kind of start to recommend as well kind of the improvements. So if you scroll down, you will see that basically because of the limitation of the output size, you will see that the code kind of stopped here in a way. But basically, you will see some of the implementation, some of the recommendations have been implemented here. So for example, from IPython display, import display, this has been included. That wasn't included in my original code. Okay. So what I would like to do as well is sometimes when we write any code, we would like to reduce the memory usage for that code. So what you could do is that you can say, well, can you, for example, reduce the memory usage of the code? Please note that, again, ChatGPT is quite smart. It actually kind of remembers what we have done in the previous task. So I'm talking about the exact same code. And here we go. It's going to tell you, well, you can reuse these techniques. You can use the type parameter. For example, when reading the CSV file, you can specify the data type of each column. So basically, instead of maybe using, let's say, float, maybe data type, which might include or consume a large amount in memory, you can simply specify the data type before, so that is going to improve your memory usage. You can also use the as type method to simply convert from one data type to another, which is pretty good as well. You can delete unnecessary variables as well. And you can use generators. And here we go. It's telling you, well, here is the optimized version of that code. So what you see here is basically specifying the data type for each of the columns available in the actual CSV file. So again, super accurate, so pretty incredible. So basically, instead of using, the same data type for the entire pandas data frame, here we can simply optimize it to optimize our memory usage. And that's pretty much it for this prompt. What I'm going to do next is, well, sometimes I would like to remove any repeated computations. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT to simply detect if we have repeated computations in our code or not. So I'm going to say, are there any repeated computations that can be avoided? Can I tell you, well, yes, there are some repeated computations in your current code. Can I tell you, well, avoid computing y twice. So basically, I did the y computation here twice. And avoid computing scaling object twice. So here the scaling object for y is computed twice as well. And it's going to tell you, well, here is the optimized code without basically these tasks. It's going to remove these operations for you. Again, pretty incredible if you'd like to do memory optimization, if you'd like to remove any repeated part of the code. What I would like to do next is I would like to see if we can parallelize that code. So I'm going to say, well, can you basically parallelize that code to improve performance? Well, let's go ahead and check it out. And it's going to tell you one way to parallelize that code is to use, for example, joblib library. And that's going to simply perform parallel computations for you. And here's going to tell you when you perform, actually here another example too, is going to tell you can use scannerplot when you parallelize the loop that generates a scannerplot for each feature. And you can also, when you perform hyperparameters tuning optimization, you can perform parallelization to that process as well. I'm just going to tell you, well, here we go. This is a sample code. And if you check it out, you can see, for example, here, this is the parallel part. Okay, if you'd like to parallelize some of the tasks, such as plotting, for example, scatter plots, instead of using that for loop and doing that operation over and over again, you can just do all the entire operations in parallel. You can also see, because we don't have hyperparameter optimization and tuning, you will see that basically the code here stopped pretty much. Okay. And then sometimes you'd like to improve the runtime of a given code. So I can say, could you please improve the runtime or this code, and it's going to give you a few suggestions. One, you can use a more efficient algorithm. Instead of using XGBoost, you can maybe use a simpler algorithm, maybe support vector machines, or maybe random forest, for example. I'll tell you, well, you can use feature selection techniques, actually pretty accurate. So instead of using all the features and feeding them all to the model, instead, you can use maybe principal component analysis to do that, to simply reduce the number of features that you got in your data. You can use a subset of the data. So instead of using the entire data set, you can just use a sample of that. You can optimize hyperparameters. You can use parallel computing. You can also use GPUs, for example, like hardware accelerators as an example. And you can also optimize your code by removing unnecessary computations or using efficient data structures. Again, pretty incredible suggestions. And then finally, and this is kind of the fun part here, basically what I'm going to do here is going to ask the ChatGPT to simply apply one of the recommendations that they basically offered, which is, we'd like to optimize hyperparameters, like kind of experiment with different hyperparameters for the machine learning model or machine learning algorithm, to try to give me a better performance. And here we go. So what I'm going to do here, what you see is, well, yes, you can optimize hyperparameters to find the best combinations using grid search CV. Here we go. What I see is basically the code is going to be written for you. So we're going to show you here we're going to read the data. We're going to specify the data type for each column. We're going to split the data. We're going to do the scaling of that data. And then this is kind of the fun part. This is quite new, so we haven't had that in our original code. And basically, ChatGPT was able to define hyperparameters for the XGBoost model for you. And basically here running or training the model with the grid search CV and basically generating all the different predictions. In this lesson, we will learn how to leverage ChatGPT to basically convert from one programming language to another. Let's go ahead and start with a simple example. Let's assume that I would like to convert a code from Python to C programming language. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to say, well, please go ahead, convert this code, which is a very basic, simple function in Python. I just want to convert it to C. Let's go ahead and see. Here we go. It's going to tell you what, here is the equivalent code in C, and this is simply the code. Of course, if you're familiar with C programming language, it's a little bit, I would say, the syntax is not user-friendly as compared to Python. Python is very clean here. You won't see any curly braces or semicolons, but here you will see base semicolons. You'll see there are some curly braces as well. And it looks pretty good. And it's also explaining to you what that code actually performs. Okay, what I could do as well is I can say, maybe I would like to convert that code to MATLAB instead. So I'm going to say, convert this code to MATLAB instead. Go ahead and test it out. Here we go. I'm just going to tell you one. This is the result, basically, of the function, but in MATLAB or MScript. So here's going to tell you, well, this is the name of the function. Then you specify the output variable. You give the function a name, and then this is the basic MScript, basically, if you're familiar with MATLAB. And it's also explaining to you here what that function does, which is, again, super powerful. Well, what about Java, for example? Let's see. Okay, we're just testing out ChatGPT ability in multiple programming languages. Here we go. Again, this is pretty incredible because now you can see you can basically write the code once and you can convert it to multiple programming languages. All right, so what we could do next, we can say, well, what about maybe C++, for example? Use equivalent code in C++, and this is simply the code. Again, you can leverage that. Again, ChatGPT pretty much knows every single programming language out there. Okay. What I would like to do next is I would like to basically ask ChatGPT to train an artificial neural network model to perform image classification using TensorFlow and Keras. And what I'm going to do afterwards is basically I'm going to ask ChatGPT to convert from one framework, which is TensorFlow and Keras, to PyTorch. And let's see if that works. We're going to say, write a code that trains an artificial neural network to perform image classification using TensorFlow and Keras. Please note that TensorFlow is simply the Google's framework to build, train, and deploy AI and ML models at scale. And Keras is simply a high-level API that sits on top of TensorFlow and just simply allow us to build artificial neural networks using a few simple lines of code. So let's go ahead and test it out. Again, this is incredible because now you have an AI that is building or training or giving you the code to another AI that does image classification. So here we go. Basically, here we have imported TensorFlow for us. And then it assumed that we have our Cypher-10 dataset, which is a benchmark dataset. And then you are scaling or normalizing the data. And this is simply how we build our model using Keras API. So you will see that here we're building multiple convolutions, multiple max pooling layers, and then we have conv2D. We flatten it up, and then we have a dense, fully connected artificial neural network. Again, if you're not familiar with that, don't worry. This is just a code that trains an AI for you to perform image classification. And it's also explaining to you what that code performs. This is kind of the scary part. Basically, what I'm going to do next, I'm going to say, could you please convert this code for me to PyTorch instead? And here we go. Here's the equivalent code in PyTorch. So here's gonna basically, you see they're gonna use the exact same data set. And here you will find that we're building the exact same neural network. Here we have convolution layers, max pooling layers, and then you will find fully connected artificial neural network here. And this is the exact same code, exact equivalent code, but in a completely different framework, which is PyTorch. And again, this is pretty incredible. And it's also, of course, explaining to you the code here at the end. Okay. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask ChatGPT to develop an AI that is similar to ChatGPT using Keras. Basically, I can ask ChatGPT to build itself. And we are going to conclude basically with these few lines of prompts. So I'm going to say, develop an AI that can perform similar tasks to ChatGPT using Keras. Let's see if that works. Okay, develop an AI that performs similar tasks to ChatGPT using Keras would involve building a deep neural network or deep learning model that can generate text based on input prompts. And here they use a technique for recurrent neural networks and transformer architectures. And here we go. Basically, you see that this is simply the code here that basically build an LSTM network or long short-term memory network. And you find that basically here you are training the model afterwards and generating text out of it. And what you notice is basically here they used recurrent neural networks and LSTM networks. And the technology behind ChatGPT is actually based on transformers. So I'm going to say, well, what about writing this code to include a transformer architecture instead of, let's say, LSTMs, something like that. Sure, here's an updated version using transformer architecture instead. And here we go. You will find that, again, the code is very well documented. You see here generating input and target sequence. And this is simply the definition of the transformer layers that includes self-attention. And this is simply the exact same architecture that is used behind the scenes when we train these ChatGPT models. Again, pretty incredible. You are generating text and also explaining as well what that code actually performs. What I could do next, I can say, well, could you please convert this code to PyTorch? And of course, if you make spelling mistakes, ChatGPT is quite smart to actually correct it for you before generating the prompt. Here we go. You will find that you are loading the training data, you are loading the testing data, you are defining the neural network architecture, and you will find that there is a transformer-based here model that has been captured, and defining a loss function, training the model afterwards, and then evaluating the model. And of course, you can include explanation as well at the end. Okay, I know this is quite, I would say, scary as well at the same time. So what I'm going to do, and that would be the final basically prompt that I'm going to say here, I'm going to say, can AI replace in the future? I know this is kind of a big question mark, and I get asked that question a lot. Well, it's going to tell you, it's a diplomatic answer here. So I'm going to say, basically, AI can automate certain tasks performed by developers, such as generating code or debugging. However, it's unlikely that AI will fully replace developers in the future. Developing software requires not only technical expertise, but also creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, and communication skills. While AI can automate some of these repetitive tasks and mundane tasks, it cannot replicate the human abilities required to software development. But please note that what I see is you can use these tools to kind of supercharge your productivity. And that's kind of the reason behind all these series of videos.